Magad Cancorla, and here we go again, Minister Robert. 2016 I was elected. I don't know, many times I've talked on these budgets and on these motions and so on. And so tonight we said we're talking for a few years, but actually we're talking for a very long time. So the disability capacity review is a good place to start. And you did one of the introductions along with the senior minister and along with Minister Gorman in relation to that. And that set out the situation really. It set out the unmet need. It set out damningly so what happened from 2008 onwards. So when we talk about the crisis, that crisis created huge crisis in all the services that have never recovered, and they've never recovered, and I see you nodding, and I know you agree with that. And so if we look at that, and I've marked a few pages, I've read it, I've marked it. But you know what's interesting about it? All of the reports that went before that. And I think that's important to say. So when we stand here critical, it's because there's a whole background to people with disabilities fighting on a daily basis for a framework that recognises that services must be given to them as of right, a framework within a rights-based approach. And I welcome that this confirmation tonight that the protocol, the optional protocol, is going to be signed, although there's again a gap in relation to when precisely it's going to be signed. And so if we look at this disability capacity review back in 2012, can you imagine that? We talked about transforming lives. Back in 2012, 2014, we had a value for money, a policy review of disability services, and we continue on. Up then we go to 22 and 23. That's a very interesting year because we have the Indicon report on the cost of disability that we never implemented. We have the cross-party committee that did great work, Joint Committee on Disability Matters, and we had some other report as well in a year between 2022 and 23. And all of that was absolutely begging us to deal with people with disability, which is over 1 million people, depending on your definition of disability. And I remember years ago in Galway, we passed the Barcelona Declaration to take away this distinction. Good design enables and bad design disables. And it was in relation to physical infrastructure in Galway. And we passed the Barcelona Declaration. I had the privilege of putting that motion. And it was to get away from distinctions, have a universally accessible city. Great in theory, dropping footpaths, dishing footpaths and so on, making it accessible. We got 3-month quarterly reports for about 2-3 years, all gone by the board. And certainly when it came to the businesses and support for the businesses, which I totally support, when they took over the public space, nobody once considered the Barcelona Declaration or even looked at it to see were we complying with our obligations under the Barcelona Declaration. So we're here tonight again with a motion from Sinn Féin. I want to thank Sinn Féin for that motion, and I want to thank you for the detail that you've set out. And I welcome that the government is not putting a counter motion, but I really would like to hear what you are doing now. And I'm not here to lambaste the government, although I'm highly critical, because we seem to learn nothing and we get more and more reports. And so we've just passed a budget with ample opportunity to actually put the reports into action in a way that would help the economy to thrive, and we didn't do that. And so I'm standing here again speaking to this motion and saying, at what stage will what we say match the reality on the ground? So let me read from a letter, which I reluctantly do, and I've taken the person's name of it. And that person, the family, are looking for respite for a 9-year-old child. And the answer comes back from somebody who's a general manager, who has a doctorate and so on. Very impressive. And they come back to tell us there's no service. Okay, they list out the service in terms of the disability network team and that, but in terms of respite, no break for that family, because the HSE wrote to Ability West, and Ability West said we have no respite. And we know this because every time I've spoken, I've raised Ability West and I've raised the Brothers of Charity. And the Brothers of Charity some years ago went to the trouble of outlining the gaps in their services. And they pointed out one of the big problems was there was no capital funding for them, so that they could build respite services in addition to shortages of staff. So no capital funding for them, no ability to get funding. And you know what they do then, these services that we outsource everything to? They rent buildings. And they rent from developers and they rent in estates. And so all of the money is short-term, short-lived, and the actual gaps in terms of the capacity review and the Indicon report, all that they highlighted, all of those gaps are still there. And we are doing our best to say to people, I know there are billions, but I'll ask Minister Rabbitt. You know, that's what we're left saying. No respite for an 8-year-old. And that's repeated ad nauseum in the city and the county, while we waste millions on rent. I'm over the time, so I'll stop.